Skinwalker Stories. Story 1 by Navajo Joe 00. This is my father's story written from his perspective. It follows an experience he had with a skinwalker on the Navajo reservation. When I was about 11 or 12, we lived in a small house made of mud and stone. A lot like our house now. It was two of my brothers and I in the house. Everyone else had gone to the James feast and left us to tend the sheep. We were getting ready for bed when we heard the dogs going crazy outside. Thinking it was nothing more than coyotes howling in the distance, we told them to be quiet. We began to drift off into sleep, and the dogs would not shut up. Somehow, I was able to go to sleep for a few hours. Then I woke up very late in the night. It was very quiet and still in the house, save for my brother's snoring and breathing. I realized I needed to use the outhouse and woke up my brother to take me there. He teased me about being scared, which I certainly was. We went out with our flashlight to the outhouse. The dogs began with their crazed barking out in the sagebrush, going from one place to the next. My brother went first and I waited outside for him. While waiting, I tried to follow the dogs with my flashlight. Suddenly there was a very loud whine from one of the dogs. Then everything went quiet again. It was really too quiet for that time of year. Not even the sheep were making noise. Suddenly I heard a few of the dogs going completely mad by the truck. When I looked over, there was this man. He was unbelievably tall, leaning one arm on the cab roof of the truck. He was looking at the dogs for a little, and then suddenly kicking one of them. They all scattered in different directions. The thing looked up at me and I saw its face. It had a pure white face, like a full moon, two burning red eyes, and a slight smile that was pure black. I could not move or make a sound. It began to walk toward me with long strides, until it finally towered over me. All I began to see was a dark red. Like the color of the blood when you cut the throat of a sheep. I kept getting deeper and deeper into its eyes. I could faintly hear my brother coming out of the outhouse. With this, the thing looked up at him. Reality came rushing back to me. I noticed that my brother was too distracted with his buckle to realize what was going on. I also noticed this thing's long hands hovering just inches from my head. Its skin was black ash, and he smelled like a bloated dead animal in summer. I was still unable to move or speak. The skinwalker began to move toward my brother. Finally noticing this figure, my brother became paralyzed as I was. Closer and closer it drew, reaching an arm out toward my brother's head. Something finally snapped in me. I became unbearably angry. I broke from the trance and lunged at the skinwalker, raising my arms like a wild animal and baring my teeth at it. A growl came out that I never knew I could make. I became more and angrier at the thing that was trying to hurt us. It kept that smile at first, but the angrier I got, the more the smile faded. Finally, with everything I had, I began to make this primal roar at it. It fell backwards and ran away into the night. Looking back at me, its eyes were dim and dull, its smile now long since gone. The next morning the family returned home from the feast. After relaying the story to my parents, they quickly hired a medicine man. Story 2 by Redditor Hypoeo. Possible skinwalker story from 4 years ago, still spooks me to this day. I'm not saying this was 100% a skinwalker, but the encounter did not feel natural at all. It was midday and I was driving home from work. I pulled into my neighborhood and got to my circle and parked in my driveway. When I got out of my car I shut the door and for some reason I paused and dart my head to the right to look at the end of the circle, felt like I needed to, I guess. There was a large black dog, don't remember the breed, just standing there, and we made eye contact for about 1 to 2 seconds. I felt strangely frightened and I ran to my door. When I looked back he was running towards me. I had to unlock my door frantically and was able to get inside and shut the door like a millisecond before he got to me. This doesn't seem that strange, but let me explain. My circle is on the end of my street and the only way out is the other end of the street. I did not see this dog when I was pulling up. I have diagnosed OCD, and one of the things I do is look at all the houses on the street before I pull into my circle to make sure there's not people out that I could run over accidentally. And there's no way I can wrap my head around how he could have got to my circle by the time I got out of the car without me seeing him. The only way is he was at the end of the street out of sight and full sprinted to the end of my circle, but even then it seems far-fetched. Another thing that feels weird about this encounter is that without seeing him prior to this, I felt like I needed to look out to the end of the circle as soon as I exited my car. And there he was, just standing there. The way I felt after staring at him for a second makes me uneasy too. I genuinely felt fear, though having no real reason to. I'd also like to exclaim that was my first and last time ever seeing that dog. I lived in that neighborhood for 2 years at that point and have never seen that dog before. I lived there another 2 years before moving and still never saw him again. It was definitely not one of my neighbor's dogs. Story 3 by Redditor Squid Bits. Skinwalker Encounter in Phoenix. Hey, I'm pretty new to Reddit and just joined this sub after seeing it recommended and want to share an experience I had with you guys. First though, I'd like to give you some background about myself. I'm 36 at the time of this encounter, and I've always been interested in the paranormal. I've had a couple of experiences that don't quite fit this sub, so I'll post those elsewhere. I'd like to backtrack for a moment and emphasize that interested in the paranormal does not mean an outright believer. I'm certainly open to it, but more often than not I'll enter a situation with an agnostic attitude and instantly develop one of skepticism once I start assessing and evaluating everything. That being said, I do love a good mystery and don't think for a moment that people who believe in such things are lying or stupid. We all have our reasons for believing what we do. I tried sending this in through voicemail to Monsters Among Us a while ago, but I don't think it ever got aired. Anyway, let's get on with it. I was working 1.5 jobs in 2019, the 5 was as an on-call assistant private investigator, and the main one was as a security guard. We mainly did patrols for apartments and a small handful of residential contracts. This particular event took place at 19th Avenue and Camelback, which, if you're from Phoenix, you know is a pretty shady part of town. The apartments I patrolled were just south of there. They were predominantly low-income tenants, half of whom were refugees from all over the globe. The complex was well known in the area for theft, violence, break-ins, drug dealing, and so on. I liked patrolling it because I felt like I was helping people who genuinely needed it, and the vast majority of them were very grateful that I was there. I got to know many of them very well, and we would often talk and shoot the breeze before I had to start making my rounds again. One of the people I talked to was a native guy who I won't name for obvious reasons. He was often on his balcony getting drunk and high, things which we were supposed to report, but fuck that, as long as you weren't causing any trouble or making a lot of noise. I'm not saying shit about it, and would usually say hi to me when I arrived on post and we'd talk for a while, then I'd start my shift. Never any real issues with the guy. He liked listening to his music, having a few beers and having a blunt or two. Seemed like a nice guy. He had a tattoo on his chest of some Kachina dolls, though I have no idea if they play into this encounter or not. Anyway, in the summer of 2019 I was doing my rounds, and around 8:30 p.m. I hear him chanting loudly in his native language. I went to see if he was okay, as he never did this before. When I got there he was inside, so I kept doing my patrol until I heard it again not long after. I went back to his side of the complex and saw him, his pregnant fiancée and his son, whom I had never met before, coming down the stairs, and he looked at me and said, "Hey man, follow me." When I was walking behind them I saw what looked like a giant knife in the son's hand, but when we got to the parking lot I could see it was just a very large feather, and his father had 2 smaller ones. Maybe from a juvenile eagle? When we entered the parking lot I saw a native woman standing there who I had kicked out earlier for being loud and yelling at a guy who was the roommate of the native tenant. I'd seen him before and knew he lived there, but didn't know he was his roommate. I don't remember what they were arguing about this time, but she had her 2 sons with her now, 10 years old and maybe a 6-month-old in a stroller. They were going back and forth with each other, and the father and son began taking the feathers and rubbing them on the children's faces while whispering in their language. The mother flipped the fuck out. "Don't you put that fucking evil on my babies, you sick fuck. Fuck you, get the fuck away from my babies," and so on. I was about to step in and tell them to stop when they stood up and said, in a very guilty voice, "We aren't doing anything to hurt the baby. That's why I even brought the security guard to make sure everything is okay," to which she replied, "He doesn't know what the fuck is going on. Truer words have never been spoken." She then says, "If you guys aren't doing anything wrong, Then do it on your pregnant fiance's belly. The dad says okay and turns to his son to whisper something in his ear, and now it's the kid's turn to flip the fuck out. He yells, "You're still fucking evil. I'm half Christian and I'm not doing this evil shit," etc., 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 and takes off running. The dad and his fiancée yelled at him to come back, and then he takes off after him. I'm stuck there trying to get the lady with the kids to leave, now for their own safety, and then I ran off looking for the dad and son. I didn't find them, so just assumed they left the property and therefore weren't my problem anymore. Not long after, I saw a fresh blood trail and vomit on the sidewalk and a knife nearby it, and walked back to the native guy's balcony, where I could now see him getting bandaged up by his fiancée due to having a huge gash on his forehead. I called the cops. I hated doing that, but now it was serious. They came, I explained everything that had happened, and they knocked on his door, but there was no answer. They told me there was nothing they could do since it was a family issue, and the dad that was attacked didn't want to talk to them, which makes sense, I suppose, from their point of view. No charges were ever filed. The next day I spoke with the manager about the incident. He told me, "Oh, you mean Mike, not his real name? Man, I've been keeping an eye on him. He moved here after he got let out of prison for manslaughter." If any of you are familiar with the process for becoming a skinwalker, you know that one of the big steps to take in order to become one involves murder. I only saw the guy a few times afterwards, and we never done of the incident again, but it was always in the back of my mind whenever I saw him. For the record, I don't personally think people can turn into coyotes or wield magical powers, no disrespect intended to anyone at all. However, I do think that some people think they are capable of such things. Anyway, if someone who is more knowledgeable about these things has any ideas, I'd love to hear them, particularly about the feathers and the Kachina tattoos. I knew a native guy years ago who had a specific tattoo put on him by a family member in case he ever got into prison, so he couldn't be recruited by the Warrior Society. The native prison gang think their version of the Aryan Brotherhood, and always wondered if they had any hand in the whole skinwalker thing in the Southwest. Cheers.